before you start a presentation, you have to tell a joke. So I said to him, that's not the way I normally do things, but I said to him, you go away, but you have to come back with a psychology joke. So this is what he came back with. He said, Dad, I got one. And he said, Dad, a naked guy walks into a psychologist's office. He's completely naked. And he says, Doc, or, please help me. What do you think's wrong with me? And the doctor says, I can clearly see your nuts. So that's what he gave me. I wasn't impressed, but I decided that I would listen to him and start with that joke. And actually, it leads me really, I think, well into what we are speaking about tonight, which is looking at COVID-19 through the eyes of our children. And I think we would have all said that anyone who got up last year or even the end of last year or the beginning of this year and said, we are going to be in the situation that we're in, they would have said we're nuts, and I would have been in line, because it is completely surreal what we are going through. So I think for me, what I'd like to do is just point out that for a while the focus was really on the physical side of COVID, of the coronavirus, and that was completely understandable. We needed to find out what this virus was about, how do we deal with it. But slowly over time, I think we've started to see that people have seen that there's a severe psychological, emotional side to this, that people are really, really struggling. So I think that's really where I want to start, is I want to start by talking about where we stand right now from a psychological point of view, where we are from to parents, adults as well. I think there are so many of us, and most people are experiencing lockdown fatigue. And I think that's the most important place to start. We've been experiencing this for 6 months. So this is not something that is new to us. But what is actually happening at the moment? What is actually happening? Well, I think we're experiencing lockdown fatigue. A lot of us are. So we feel like we're caught in jail. We are stuck. And we really are not enjoying the experience. It's just not what we signed up for. It's not something that we want. But then there are some interesting psychological processes happening. The first one is confirmation bias. And in fact, what is confirmation bias? Confirmation bias really is that we look for information that gives us permission to meet our needs. So really what we do, and that's why I've put up, I don't really love this idea of fake news, maybe because it's associated with Donald Trump, but this idea of fake news, that if we want to go out, if we are feeling that we need to go out, we look and we scan for information anywhere we can to give us the right to have service, gives us the scientific proof that actually we can go and sit in restaurants or go for cups of coffee or have birthday parties. And we will look anywhere. And these days, there are a lot of places we can look to confirm our information bias. So that's one thing that's happening. People are feeling locked down, they are feeling the fatigue, and they will find information wherever they can to justify what they're feeling they need to do, because it has been a very long time that we've been in lockdown. And the next thing that happens, another psychological process that happens for people, is something we call the power of the local majorities. And really what that is that we are really, as people, we're influenced by the people that surround us, our immediate family and friends. So that's very powerful. And then we see, bro, dude, yeah, they're going out, we're meeting for Shabbos, we're doing what we need. So when we see the people around us doing certain things, even if it's against what's been advised, we tend to follow that. Well, because I'm talking to King David, the Leadys are doing it, the Cohens are doing it, the Abramsons are doing it. So we'll definitely we're also allowed to do that. And then that kind of acts as a spiral, and and then more and more people do it. And we call that the power of local majorities. And I think we've seen a bit of that over the last month. And then the last thing that I think is happening at the moment is similar to confirmation bias. It's called availability bias. And that's the tendency to be more influenced with your actual life experience compared to what you're reading in news reports. So even if you read that people have experienced, that the numbers are a certain amount, and they could be very high numbers. These are the certain amount of people who have contracted coronavirus. These are the certain amount of people that have unfortunately passed away. That doesn't really resonate with us. What is the most important thing that resonates with us is what happens to us directly, or by something that happens to us a second time removed. So it happens to a friend of a friend. And that really, really impacts on us. So if we don't know many people who have been infected, or we don't know many people who have passed away, we already kind of feel more immune, even though the numbers, the scientific numbers, the numbers we're reading in the papers are telling us a very different story. So I wanted to point that out because I think our children, and as I say, us as well, we are at a very critical stage where from a psychological point of view, it's a real, real struggle to still keep in mind that the coronavirus is very much still here, even though we're going down the levels, and that we need to still be very careful. So we need to be very careful of confirmation bias and the power of local majorities and the availability bias, because we need to listen to what the scientists are telling us, what the experts are telling us, and we need to communicate that to our children, that the coronavirus is not gone. So I thought it would be important just to kind of, from a psychological point of view, point out where we are psychologically 6 months down the line. So we really are fatigued, and we need to really be on our guard that we don't let these 3 psychological processes allow us to trick ourselves in many ways that everything's okay now, we can just relax. So let's go straight on to talking about children and the effect that the coronavirus has had on our children. And really, I think for me, the most important thing to say is that, it seems, thank God, to have spared a lot of our children's bodies, but it certainly has not spared their minds. And, it's so new, the coronavirus, and there hasn't been very much time for research to come out. But understandably, there has just recently research we've seen research coming out of Wuhan in the Hubei province in China, because obviously that's where it started. And they did a research on 2,330 school children and adolescents. And very important to keep in mind that these children were only in lockdown for 34 days. That's only 34 days. And if you keep in mind that in South Africa, we had a much longer lockdown period. And only in 34 days, what they found out of these 2,330 children, that 22.6% actually had depressive symptoms, and 18.9% had heightened levels of anxiety. And again, that's only after 34 days. And in South Africa, just on anecdotal kind of information that is going around, it's absolutely clear that our children are not escaping psychologically from the effects of being in lockdown. So I think for me that's important. There isn't formal research, but certainly we're seeing that our children are traumatized. A lot of our children are traumatized. And in time, I think it'll become clearer exactly as we do more and more research, see what the real effects are. And I think the question is, why are our children traumatized? Specifically because of the COVID-19. And I think it's important to say there's ongoing fear. And that's the issue which makes us a complicated trauma. Because, like when we have fight or flight, so we okay, I don't like snakes. So I'm going to use snakes as an example. I'm walking in the Kruger Park, which seems to be very popular these days as a holiday destination. I'm walking along and I see a snake because I don't like snakes. And I go into that fight or flight mode. And then the noradrenaline and the adrenaline kicks in. And then I'm either going to kill the snake, or maybe I don't want to upset anyone, or I'm going to run for my life. But that is the fight or flight mode. Hopefully I don't freeze, but I'll fight or flight. And then it will be over. It will be over. There'll be an end. They even talk about, with 9/11, that there was an end. It happened. It was unbelievably traumatic, but that there was the end. And then people could deal with, with the trauma. This is not the case with the coronavirus. It is ongoing. And that is one of the most difficult things, I think, for children and for adults as well, is when will this end? If we knew that this trauma will be over on the 1st of December, then somehow we have an end line in mind. But what's more difficult is to deal with the trauma that is ongoing. So that complicates things for children right now. Of course, isolation from family and friends. We no matter, certainly I'm a person who doesn't love to be out in the world, but I think even people like myself who are kind of more introvert need connection. And we certainly need connection in times of trauma. That's what we tend to do. And we see that generally, and certainly in the community, when someone has a loss or there's a trauma, we tend to move together. We hold each other. We don't isolate. And right now in this trauma, we've been told we cannot come together. We cannot support each other physically. And we really need that connection. And what really comes through to me when I think about isolation is, what do they do to the most hardened criminals? They put them in isolation, in solitary confinement. That is the biggest punishment you can give a human being. So that's also causing difficulty for our children, is the trauma of not being able to be with their friends and actually physically connect with them. And then, of course, the absence from school and less of a structure. Now, we know that what lowers anxiety is predictability and consistency. And I think, even if we're not anxious, we like to a degree, like to know what's happening in our lives. That gives us a sense of predictability. And especially for our children, when they didn't have school, there really was, initially it was all fantastic. And we'll talk about the phases, I think, that we've been through or that our children have been through. But certainly with that lack of structure and predictability, that definitely increased anxiety. And then the economic impact. I mean, it was devastating for so many people, this coronavirus. And keep in mind that children mirror their parents or their caregivers' emotions. And a lot of adults were really, and rightly so, traumatized by the coronavirus. So children were directly affected by the adults around them who were traumatized themselves. And it's important also to point out that any children or adolescents who had pre-existing conditions, if it was depression or anxiety, were certainly and are certainly at a high risk for being more sensitive to experiencing more anxiety and more depression because of the coronavirus. So I've definitely seen that clients that I was seeing before, children that I was seeing before, definitely have exacerbated their symptoms because of the coronavirus. And the last point, what I think has been very traumatic, is a general point, is that we as human beings, and children are no exception, is that we have a negativity bias. And what I mean by that is we are programmed to actually be very negative in the way that we are in the world. And I know that sounds, very negative, but I think that's really evolutionary, where we are always thinking about how to survive. And we really have to make a big effort as human beings to think positively. And right now, with all this, if you want to call it negativity happening around us, we're more inclined to have and play into this negativity bias. More negative thoughts create more negative thoughts. So children, I find, are also doing that they're getting caught up in the negativity bias and really are needed to consciously, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, think more positively about life. But so that's really why I think children are more traumatized than they have been with any world event, including like 9/11, for all these reasons. But the question is, how do you identify if one of your children is not coping? How do you identify if one of your pupils is not coping? And some of these points are more related more to younger children, and some are more to teenagers. But let's just run through them quickly, because I think it's so important that when you're in the classroom, that you are empowered, that you're aware of what to look out for when children are displaying certain symptoms or characteristics. And the first one, which is very common, and obviously you might not see this in class directly, but a change in sleeping or eating patterns. So that they'll be eating a lot more, or eating a lot less. They'd be sleeping a lot more or sleeping a lot less. And you'll probably be picking it up in class where children are or adolescents are so much more tired. They're less enthusiastic than they were before, and they've withdrawn. So those are the things that you can look out for. And also this constant reassurance seeking, asking, are we okay? Is everything going to be okay? And it could be related to the coronavirus, but also reassurance seeking about work. Am I going to fail? What are we going to be doing next? Asking for predictability and consistency. More for younger children is general regression, which we'll see. Regression obviously is when a child reaches a certain developmental milestone and then regresses, moves back. So if a child, for example, becomes more anxious about separating, or they were dry, now they're wetting themselves or soiling themselves, they actually are moving backwards developmentally because of feeling traumatized. And then also for younger children, frequent tantrums or meltdowns, even though I know that some of our teenagers might seem like they are also very tantrums or meltdowns. And then physical symptoms. And obviously it's important to check these things out with your GP before we assume it is psychological. But often, our children and teens somatize. So they actually do have headaches, stomach aches, and muscle pain, but it's all related to stress and anxiety rather than, related to actually, having a physical kind of problem. So, they haven't pulled their back out, or they haven't eaten something bad, have a bug. But very important to check it out physically first. And especially in teenagers, we look for that constant moodiness or consistent moodiness and irritability. You might turn around and say, oh, well, my teenagers in my class are always irritable and moody. But we're looking for a consistency over a period of time. And we're looking to a 10 to 14 day period. Very much related to teenagers as well. Just a loss of care in presentation and grooming and washing. They just absolutely don't want to wash. They don't care how they look. They really, their appearance and the way they look after themselves just deteriorates. And you might pick that up in the classroom as well, even though you might also say to me that some teenagers look like they never wash or they never brush their hair. And then a very, very clear sign to know that a child, and even younger children, are really struggling is they talk about life not worth living. Like, I just don't see the purpose in life. I just don't want to live. There's nothing worth living for. Those kind of, that kind of talk. So I think these are the symptoms that even you as teachers can look out for in the classroom. And if you're not sure, don't be afraid. I would suggest to call the child up and have a one-on-one and to see if they'd open up. But I think, children are interesting and adolescents are interesting because their bodies, and as adults, don't lie. So watch out for these symptoms, watch out for these characteristics. And if you are unsure, don't be afraid to call them out, or even to let the psychologist or the grade head know about your concern about a child. So I think that's very important to keep in mind. What also I thought was important is to highlight what to keep in mind when you're talking to your pupils about the virus. I mean, again, probably if you're in high school, the kids are not coming up to you in class or saying, tell me about the virus. And, but I do think it's important that when they do, or they are asking about the virus, or you're hearing that there's misperceptions, that you do have some guidelines to talk to the kids about the coronavirus, how to go about it without causing more anxiety for them. And I think the most important point is just remember their age and their personality. So are we talking to a teenager, or are we talking to a young child in grade 1? And obviously it's very important to balance the information that you give them according to their age and their personality. So even if you have an older child who's very anxious in high school, I think it's very important that you give them enough information to answer their questions, but not give them too much information that will exacerbate their anxiety. And I find this very useful, whether your child is in high school or primary school. If they are asking about the coronavirus, ask them what they know first, because then you get a guideline of what they know, and then you can work out what is false, what is true, and then you can work around that, and also ask them what they want to know, because you might give them information that they certainly weren't asking about. And again, that might open up a whole Pandora's box and cause more anxiety. I've had some fascinating interactions with kids over the last 6 months. I've had kids saying, can we just cancel it? I had a 7-year-old saying, let's just cancel it. Let's cancel Corona. Like it was an extramural activity. And I've also had kids talk about zombies, like, well, geez, we're living in this zombie apocalypse because we're all walking around, we're going to infect each other. And I've also had many children worrying about being infected and being in hospital alone, and they won't be able to be visited by their parents. So there've been some real worries. The funniest one I had was, I call him the kosher kid, and he said to me he's not worried about coronavirus at all because he is kosher and there's no ways he's going to ever eat a bat. So he was safe. So that was the kosher kid. But again, completely misperception that if he could go out, he could do what he wanted as long as he didn't have a bat to eat. So check out what the child knows. Check out what the teenager knows. I think very importantly, do not dismiss feelings. I think as human beings, we generally want to make people feel better. And it's something we struggle with as psychologists generally. We want to give people a message that it's okay. We want to move forward and say, don't worry about your feelings. Don't worry that you are struggling. So for children, let's just go watch TV. Let's just go into the kitchen and make some pancakes. Or if you're missing your friends, don't worry about it. There are people who are struggling so much more, who don't have food, who don't have a house to live in. We want to make things better. And I think it's so important that we don't dismiss feelings and we actually allow children to sit with the feelings, even if they don't sound, so upsetting. Like, I'm so upset that I'm not going to go on Shabbaton. So upset that I'm not going to be able to do the play. So upset that I'm not seeing my friends. Acknowledge it and let them speak about it. And then you can make it better. And I think for me, we should never underestimate the power of just listening and affirming feelings. So that might sound very, very predictable from a psychologist, but I can tell you that listening is so powerful, and I've learned that over the years from our clients. Also very important for adolescents and for children is to point out what is staying the same. So remember, things are in flux. There's very little predictability and consistency, and that causes anxiety and can cause our moods to go down. So it's so important to tell them what is staying the same. Listen, we're staying in the same house. You still will you'll have the same friends. You're staying at the same school, even though, again, things might change their routine, but still the same teachers. Look for the predictability and point out what is staying the same, because we want to give them foundations to hold on to give them, as I say, more predictability to lower their anxiety. And even with teenagers, even if they don't ask for that. And then the last point, I think, when talking about the virus, to lower anxiety is to put an emphasis on agency, what you can control. And, there are a lot of things that we're constantly told that what we can control, we can social distance, we can wear a mask, we can wash our hands, we can sneeze into our elbow. There are lots of things we can do. So again, why that is important is because we do feel very much out of control because we don't have a say of where this coronavirus is. It's where is it? And that feels unpredictable. And what can we do? Because it just seems to be everywhere. So to counter that, to emphasize agency, I think that's going to be very, very important to emphasize to our children. Not the anxiety around what we can't do and what's not in our control, but what we can control. I'd like to also just share some of my observations, that I've experienced in my own therapies with children. And I'd just like to start off with some general points. I definitely, and I've spoken to colleagues as well, I've definitely seen a significant increase in anxiety and depression. I think for me, we can understand that for all the reasons we've discussed before. So I think for me, also children who were more anxious, who also are susceptible to anxiety and to depression, there is a genetic loading or had experienced it before lockdown, definitely are more susceptible to it. But even children who really were very, very emotionally solid and had strong emotional foundations, have had periods, many significant amounts, have had periods of anxiety and having their moods dropped. A very, I think, a positive side of it is that I think parents are so much more appreciative of teachers. I can't tell you how many parents have said, my gosh, I have so much more empathy for that. I never knew what it took to teach my bugger. I was going to use another word. He's a pain. I have so much more empathy for what teachers have to do. And I think, I think we need to remember and remind parents of this going forward. And interesting enough, pupils from young to old, from primary school to high school, are so much more appreciative of the role that face-to-face schooling plays in their lives. Can't tell you how many children say to me, and I never thought I'd hear this, I wish I could go back to school. I'm missing my friends. Some even said, I'm missing my teachers. So there was really this appreciation of actually, and we see down here, and that's my next point, that face-to-face interaction, and I think especially for teens, have seen more and more that face-to-face interaction cannot be replaced by things like TikTok and WhatsApp, Instagram and Facebook. I think teens, and I will talk a little bit about it over here in the phases, definitely, I think are more, kind of versatile. They can spend more time on TikTok and WhatsApp and then spend a little bit of time face-to-face. But definitely the younger children really, really struggle when they don't have that face-to-face interaction, whether it's teaching or whether it's socializing. So again, I think that's something very interesting that's come out of this, is that we even hear teenagers saying, this is not, I need to see my friends. I've seen them on TikTok, I'm on WhatsApp with them. They even leave, their phone's on the table and they have WhatsApp calls with 3 or 4 of them consistently. I feel like sometimes I have some of my daughter's friends living in our house because I walk in and I just hear voices, but it still does not replace face-to-face interaction. And also what I found very fascinating is the phases of the emotions when it came to the actual moving forward of the levels. And as we moved to the different phases of the varying lockdowns, according to how the coronavirus was spreading or wasn't. And these are my kind of phases that I've imagined in my mind. So again, I think as we go on in time, I think we'll be able to concretize these more and make them more specific and more detailed. But I saw a definite trend. I think there was an initial phase at the start of lockdown where children were shocked. They took some time to adapt to being away from school, from their friends, but they settled quite quickly. I think children were generally very adaptable. And then there was a novelty phase. I think it lasted 3 to 4 weeks. And again, those timelines are an estimation, where children were holding emotionally. Certainly the older children, they loved it that they could sleep late. They were no exams, they were loving life. The younger kids did tend to struggle more, especially the little ones in nursery school, but yet were doing okay. Then the reality phase hit, and it obviously depends on the child, but actually across the board, we saw that after 3 to 4 weeks, and sometimes for children a little bit longer who were in their teens, the reality phase kicked in, and children really, really started to struggle. We started to see as psychologists and social workers, and I'm sure we heard a lot from the principals that parents were saying, please, we need to get our children back to school on some level. And that was because they were struggling, parents, emotionally and psychologically, but there was no structure to the children's days. They were online all the time, and there was no schooling. And I think for me, then we saw the online schooling phase kick in. And I certainly noticed, and again, it'll be interesting to see when studies come out, that there was a significant improvement emotionally in children across the board, except probably for the little ones who really need, can't learn online. They need that physical play to actually learn and interact. So from primary school up though, when we got onto that online schooling stage, when there was no hybrid, there was still a significant improvement, or what I would say an improvement emotionally across the board generally. Obviously, I'm generalizing. There are, always outliers, children who really were struggling still when online schooling started. And I think keep in mind, children who are compromised as far as learning difficulties or have an attention issue, I think also had issues around online schooling. But so I am generalizing, but emotionally, there was more structure to their day, which then meant their anxiety went down, and there was more connection with their friends online, and their moods lifted. And then certainly, what we have now, certainly in the primary schools, moving more into full-time learning, and for high schools, the hybrid phase, there has been a significant shift, a huge improvement in emotions. And, for me, that just shows the power of school, the importance of teachers. And often when I give feedback to a client about their child, and I say, oh, your child has got the X factor, your child is really, really, parents are, you're just saying that, you're just saying, I realize I'm talking to teachers tonight, but I really, really do think that, and the proof's in the pudding, is that we have seen that school and schooling, certainly from an emotional point of view, from a psychological point of view, has been a game changer for children across the board. So I think that is so important. And that's why I think, and again, I'm not just saying this because I'm talking to teachers. Teachers actually are the unsung heroes of the coronavirus when it comes to the psychological and emotional well-being of children and teens. Just also want to point out that teens seem to cope with the hybrid system and still maintain that emotional wellness. So they seem to be, and that's obviously again generalizing, but the majority seem to cope a lot better. The improvements in their emotional well-being seems to be sustained when they are in high school, those older grades, when they have hybrid, as well as going back to school face-to-face. But the younger children, definitely, certainly the nursery school and the primary school children, as we get younger and younger, seem to need more face-to-face learning and interaction in order to maintain that psychological improvement. But I really do mean it. I really mean it that you are the teachers, you are the heroes. And I saw the sign outside the King David's, and it rang true for me, because it's really true. Look what we've seen over the last couple of months. I mean, what you guys have had to do, you've had to adapt to this new way of teaching so quickly. You've had to, teach with masks on. You've had to deal with teenagers who are saying, oh, ma'am, sorry, I don't have my camera's not on, or my Wi-Fi is not working. You've switched on and you've got 30 kids who aren't on mute. It's been very, very difficult. I mean, even I know some teachers have had to have pet parades. One child shows their pet, their dog or their cat, and then every single other child in the class has to show their pets. I've also heard about teachers being, the children taking their screen to their parents that talk to my teacher, and suddenly you've got a parent-teacher interaction out of the blue, or you get tours of someone's house. Or before you start, you've got to talk about someone's pajamas and what everyone's wearing, and constantly being asked to go to the toilet when they're actually in their own homes. So I really, really do believe, jokes aside, that you, the teachers, are the unsung heroes of this whole situation. And again, as I've pointed out previously, not just saying that, we've seen it from a psychological perspective. By you holding the kids, by giving them that predictability and that consistency, by them being in an environment where they, again, have that structure and are able to then interact with their friends, has been a game changer. And I think hats off to all of you. My teacher is my hero. And certainly there's a lot of parents that are also thanking you very much for taking their children off their hands, because I think there was a lot of potential divorces and child abuse cases that were about to happen. So thank you very much. What I do want to say to you is that it is so important, if I may suggest, for teachers to look after themselves. And I am going to, if you can allow me, just to give you some ideas of what to look for when you are struggling from a clinical point of view. And I think it's so important because I often see this, and my colleagues talk about this, how teachers often wait until their petrol tanks are empty and don't look after themselves and are not aware of when to actually start filling up again, doing self-care. So I just wanted to point out for you teachers, adults, what to look after, what to look out for. And these will tell you that your tank is too low. So this is actually starting to tell you that if you have signs of clinical depression, that actually it's a little bit too late because you're really feeling depressed, and you should be acting when you start to sense that you're experiencing one or two of these symptoms. But just to give you an idea of when you are experiencing a full-blown clinical depression, I wanted to point out that you needed to experience 5 or more of these symptoms that I'm going to point out during the same 2-week period. And at least one of the symptoms has to be a depressed mood or a loss of interest or pleasure in certain things. So let's just run through these. And remember, you only have to experience 5, for a 2-week period. So watch out for these things. I wouldn't wait until you're experiencing all 5 or you're experiencing, these symptoms on an extreme scale. If you're noticing these things, this means as a teacher, you need to start looking after yourself. And obviously the first one is the depressed mood most of the day or nearly all day, diminished interest in pleasure and almost all activities most of the day, and again, nearly every day. Then we also look for weight loss. So remember, we also pointed out with us children, eating more or gaining weight. So we look for those extremes, and clearly it's not if you're exercising more or if you're on a specific diet and looking to lose weight. And then also this is an important one, you slow down, you really slow down, your thoughts slow down, and actually physically you feel like you're moving slower. And other people will actually see it. It's not like subjective, but actually see a physical moving slower. And then very important to fatigue or loss of energy nearly every day. And then this feeling of worthlessness or excessive feelings of guilt. And then also a diminished ability to think or concentrate. So really you're trying to do things that you normally can, and your mind is just wandering. And a more obvious one would be recurrent thoughts of death and suicidal ideation, thinking, I just don't want to be around anymore. And also very important to receive this diagnosis of depression. These symptoms must cause you a difficulty in your lives, your social life, in your occupational life, and in other areas of your life. So remember, you only really need to experience 5 of these to be diagnosed as having a clinical depression. So why I wanted to point those out is please, 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 we need you. You are so important, teachers. And I think, and I hope this doesn't sound anything but sincere, that please look out for any of these symptoms. And as soon as you do, to take action. And if I say take action, you're going to roll your eyes. You're definitely going to roll your eyes, because some of the things that I'm going to suggest you do for self-care are very obvious, but we don't do them. And that's another whole talk on its own, why we don't do the things, that we know are good for us and we should be doing, and we just don't do them. So please forgive me, I'm still going to mention 1 or 2 of those. And I know you're going to rise anyway. But what should you be doing to look after yourself? And remember, I would say these things should be done not when you are on empty or even half tank. These are things that should be done when you're on 3/4 tank, or even when you're close to full. And I'm sure if you've been to any parenting talk anywhere, and I thought I made this up one day, until I read it in a book. So I was quite upset, because somehow I was under this illusion that I had invented this, but I certainly didn't. So I can't take credit for this. But this is such a good analogy. Remember, and I'm sure a lot of you have heard this before, but I think it's important to repeat. But remember, when you go on a plane and the air hostess says, right, okay, before we take off, we're going to show you where the exits are. And if there's decompressurization, what we need to do is put the masks, oxygen masks, pull them down tightly onto yourself, and then help the children and elderly people. And that is exactly what I tell parents, and so important when it comes to teaching as well. Teaching is exhausting. Teaching is very, very difficult, but hopefully so rewarding. But the most important thing is that if you do not look after yourself, you're not going to be able to be a good teacher. You're not going to be able to be a good partner. You're not going to be able to be good for yourself. So if you are someone that feels very guilty about looking after yourself, I would say, well, then do it for your clients, or do it for your pupils. I'm talking about psychologists as well. Do it for your pupil. Do it for your partner. But it's a very unselfish thing to do, to look after yourself. So I think that's very, very, very important. And here are a couple of suggestions I have, and this is my second last slide. I'm just aware of time. So I think for me, the first one is notice what is on your mind. And you can remember it by the ABCs. And this is really, we're talking about being mindful. And I know people are sick and tired of hearing about being mindful, but why psychology often talks about being mindful is because we are not aware. We run on automatic. And hopefully through this coronavirus, we've seen that actually we are like headless chickens. We just move from the next thing to the next. We are not actually aware of what we are thinking and doing. And that's becoming more and more of a problem. So I think that's the first one, is to give yourself the space to think and be aware, and not to just respond. And that's being. That's number two, the B of the ABC. To avoid tendencies to respond on autopilot and to feed negative thoughts, to actually think, to stop, think, and be aware of what you're feeling, and then you can choose how to respond. It's more empowering. It's not just an impulsive response. And that is the C. So you choose to respond wisely, but the only way you can choose to respond on how to interact in your day and what to do is by making a gap between the experience and your reaction. So experiencing things, and then kind of the awareness, being, and then you have a choice. And it's very hard to do, but it's something that we can really, really, really develop as a skill. And it is about slowing down and making a conscious effort to slow down. And, this coronavirus has forced us to slow down to a large degree, even though we are kind of moving back into this frenetic day-by-day activity. I think it's so important to still, keep something which has been, I think, positive. If we can look for something positive in the coronavirus that made us slow down. And I would say, please try and make a conscious effort of physically moving slower in the day. I know sometimes in the morning, I actually make myself in the kitchen, I make myself dizzy because I'm turning around so quickly, and I have to slow down. And another way to slow down is to do single tasks, one by one. So you do have a plan for the day, but you complete task by task. And I can hear teachers saying, oh, you know what, I can tell you it's impossible. I've got so much on my mind. I've got something. Absolutely, but do them one at a time, one task at a time, rather seeing it as this mountain to climb. So we're going rather to the top of Everest. We're thinking about going to the top. We're going base camp 1 and then base camp 2, and break them down. And hopefully that will feel more manageable. And a very important one is to communicate with supportive people. We often feel, keeping things to ourselves is, why complain? What's it going to help? And one of the most powerful things I have learned was from a young boy who I saw in therapy, who had lost both his parents in a car crash. And this was early in my days as a new therapist. And I thought, what am I going to do to help this child? And he sat there in the first session and just cried. And I said nothing. And I just thought, he's wasting his time. And he came back the following week and said, thank you, I felt a bit better. And he taught me that day something so important, that I didn't have to say anything. I just had to listen. And so that's why I'm saying, just letting people talk to you, or you talking to people about what's on your mind, is so powerful. And that child taught me that day. So please don't underestimate the power and the nurture, the idea of going to speak to people, how much that can help, even if it feels overwhelming. So we often as people and as teachers feel overwhelmed. Please don't hesitate to go speak to colleagues or to friends. It is very powerful. And then obviously, this is just one of the obvious ones, is do things to feed you. So don't miss out on the things that you really love doing. So important to find the time to prioritize, whether it's a hobby or whether it's having something to do that really, as I say, feeds you, whether it's a sport, whatever it might be, painting, yoga, gym, and that comes down to the sleep and the exercise, which you're going to roll your eyes at. It's so powerful. If you get enough sleep, we've seen it's been proven scientifically over and over again that you are going to feel emotionally and psychologically better. And same with exercise. Obviously, you've got to check with your doctor, and you can get your discovery points. So I think for me, what's important is also to exercise. It's amazing. I think a lot of psychologists will be a lot quieter if people had to exercise a bit more. I've left this last one for last, to set and maintain boundaries. Especially now with coronavirus, I think it is so important that teachers set and maintain boundaries. And what I mean by that is that, now that we're online, I think often as parents, we feel like we can just send, teachers messages on a Sunday, 10 o'clock at night. Doesn't matter what time of the day it is. And I think that is not acceptable. And I'm certainly not saying don't be available to parents or to children, but I'm going to venture to say that you are not paramedics. You're not, and even paramedics get time off when they're on and they work, but they get time off. And I think what's so important is to set very clear boundaries with your parents and the children, that they understand that you are available for them. You are there to answer their questions, but you are not available 24/7. And I think the best way to do that is to communicate when you are available and certainly when you're not. And again, those boundaries are so important in self-care, because then you're going to start getting resentful and angry. And psychologists often have this, where they just take calls 24 hours a day, and there are no boundaries and limits, unless there's a crisis, of course, unless there's a real crisis. And those can be, and we generally know when there is a real crisis and when something really can wait till the following day. So that's me. That's what I wanted to tell you about today. I just wanted to say in conclusion, just to summarize, is that absolutely, significantly, children are feeling more anxious and depressed. And we are only going to tell in time what the psychological fallout will be for children when it comes to COVID-19. But there is no doubt, and we have seen it, and I will be very surprised if the research says anything different, but the role of school and teaching has been a godsend for children psychologically. Just like we are looking for an antidote, it sounds like a children's play, a vaccine for COVID-19. And we're looking for ways of easing the physical symptoms. We have seen without a doubt that children going to school has created a space for them to have predictability and consistency, to be less isolated, and it has been, from a psychological point of view, a game changer for children in general. So it is, have no doubt that you as teachers are playing such an important role, more than ever. I mean, you played an important role before in educating children, but more than ever, you are what is actually, and this is no exaggeration, saving children psychologically at the moment. So it's so important to keep that in mind, that when you are teaching, that you are doing so much more than imparting information. I mean, that's always been the case, but right now, as long as this pandemic continues, you are playing even more of a role in helping out the pupils in your class from a psychological and an emotional level. And without you, generally, they'd really be struggling a lot more. So I just want to say thank you. And we should be thanking you so much more for what you are doing for our children. So that's me. I hope I didn't go on too long. And I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, David. I see that there are a few questions in the chat. And the first question is, at what stage would you begin to worry about a child complaining of stomach aches?
Well, yeah, it's such a good question, and it's something that we often see from a psychological perspective, that children, that's one of the psychosomatic symptoms that children experience is tummy aches. I think the first thing to do, of course, and it's always the first port of call, is to go get things checked out from a physical point of view. So go to your GP, make sure that your child is not, have a temperature or needing to be checked out more from a physical point of view. And as I say, often children are experiencing the pain. It's not that they're not, but it is, there's no kind of physical or medical reason for them to be experiencing it. Then we know that it's psychological. So I think for me, it really, the period of time varies, but what I would say is, if a child is complaining for a day or 2 or 3 that they are experiencing tummy pains, obviously we want to check it out physically. And if there's nothing physical that the doctor can see, and it's quite clear that there's nothing, medically based, then we can start thinking from a psychological perspective. So I think for me, we're not looking for a lengthy period of time. If it's consistent over a 3-4 day period, absolutely. And then we also look for a consistency. So it comes and it goes, and it comes and it goes. And then we also kind of want to be a little bit like detectives. Is it on test days? At school? Is it on a Sunday night and Monday morning? Is it when they have a certain period, like in class, they might be struggling with a certain subject in class? So I think for me, then we can start becoming, a little bit of a detective and start checking out when these symptoms are and actually marking them down. And that often gives us clues. And what always fascinates me is that sometimes it can be or for us, it seems the most insignificant things that can be dealt with quite quickly. But for children, especially younger children, it seems completely overwhelming. So I would say, check it out with the GP. And if it's not medically based, I would say, be a bit of a detective with your child and try and see a pattern. And if you can't, then again, I would engage with the school psychologist to see if they're picking anything up, to go and, do a bit of snooping around. And then also, and failing that, then obviously to I would say, please see a social worker or psychologist and let them help you out. But very importantly, we're looking for a consistent 3-4 day period of tummy aches, you've checked it out, or that there are patterns where suddenly your child starts to have this tummy ache. And then we know, once you've checked it out physically, this is probably psychological. What is triggering this?
David, there's another question. Would you suggest a child who hasn't showed signs of anxiety before COVID and is now to go for therapy or to be put onto anti-anxiety medication?
I think for me, I see that there's a spelling mistake. I'll have to correct that. And I'm with teachers. So let me just answer your question. I think we've got to be very, very careful to send children for therapy, and especially for medication, when we are still in the middle of this, this pandemic. Therapy is, and I'm going to venture to say, maybe controversially, is used way too much, and so is medication. I think we're too quick to, and I sympathize with teachers a lot, certainly when it comes to the OT and the speech and the, those kind of therapies, because we have parents who are, going to jump on us as soon as we've missed out on anything. Why didn't you recommend OT? Why didn't you recommend remedial? But certainly what I would say is that when it comes to therapy, it can exacerbate things. It's like saying, don't think of a red Ferrari. You're going in and saying, what's wrong? You're going in and saying, let's look for the problem. So we've got to make sure that, that we know that line in the sand. So that's why I spoke about, to look out for those symptoms. If your child is their appetite changes for a day or 2 here or there, if your child is a bit anxious here or there, or his mood goes down here or there, and it's not over consistent, like 10 to 14 day period, and very importantly, it's not affecting their ability to function in the world. So they really are still doing what they need to do. Then I would say, really just, wait. I would wait and observe. But and you know your child, if you're starting to see that it's crossing that threshold where it is starting to become a consistent thing, where it is happening more often than not, and it is starting to affect the feeling in the house, it's starting to affect your child, you know, whether it's socially, academically, that's when I think you cross the line. And I would always say the first thing to do is to go to a psychologist, and even the school psychologist, first place to go. And medication always second, unless there is a clear kind of pathology where the child is completely overwhelmed. And we talk from 0 to 10. If they are 8 or 9 or 10 overwhelmed, they are absolutely having panic attacks. You know, they can't separate, they're not sleeping at night, or they are very depressed, and they are showing signs of clinical depression. Clearly, their medication is the first port of call. But I would always say, because again, and the reason I'm going to say that is because therapy has its limits. If a child is very depressed or very anxious, and we're talking 9 out of 10 or 8.5 out of 10, it's unfair to expect them to use what we are talking about in therapy to help themselves. So then therapy actually becomes counterproductive. So it's so important. And medication does have a place. Very importantly, it does have a place, but that's in the 7, 8s, and 9s. Therapy should be able to take care of anxiety and depression and those kind of you know, difficulties if a child is 7 and down. But 8 and up, unfortunately, I think therapy has its limits, and it's so important that you know, that we acknowledge that there is a place for medication when there are those extreme situations. So what I would say is it affecting your child consistently? Is it affecting the way that they are in the world with their siblings? Is it changing the whole feeling in the house between family members, the dynamic? You know, is it uncharacteristic for a consistent period of time? That's when I think for me you should act, because actually it's quite normal. It actually would be, you know, I'm saying it's quite human actually to be anxious at the moment and to be feeling a bit down at the moment, have these periods. It would be abnormal not to have them. It's just when it starts to affect you and your interactions in the world and your ability to function in the world that one should take action. So I wouldn't jump to therapy unless it's really, really indicated. And if you are unsure, maybe speak to the social worker at school to keep an eye out. If you are unsure, phone a psychologist or phone your GP, you know, to get reassurance. But as I say, I think for me, it would be normal to feel anxious at times and have your mood go down at times. You know, it's just normal. This is a very tough time.
David, thank you so much. I don't see any more questions in the chat, so I'm just going to say again a huge thank you. So much food for thought, so insightful, so interesting. Thank you so much, and I really echo your sentiments about teachers. And yeah, just thank you so much for your time and your generosity of sharing. And to everyone else, have a good evening. And thank you so much for making the time. I know Erev Rosh Hashanah, it wasn't an easy time. So we're very grateful that so many people managed to join us this evening. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.